This video is a synopsis of my paper titled Progressing Disaster and Emergency Management with First Nations in British Columbia. There's a lack of clarity about specific roles and responsibilities and an overarching lack of transparency pertaining to disaster and emergency management, DEM, and First Nations communities in British Columbia. These shortfalls correlate to the absence of accountability with various stakeholders. First Nations are at high risk to emergencies due to being geographically isolated, having poor socioeconomic conditions, low levels of education, and sparse economic opportunities. Increasing DEM capacities and proficiencies in these communities is crucial. Having suffered atrocities for over a century at the hands of the government, it is due time that attention is given to meaningful consultations. The same level of DEM service and protection is expected to be provided to First Nations as is provided to all of the communities in British Columbia. First Nations DEM is severely underfunded. Surmounting various different crises that First Nations face negates their ability to be properly prepared for emergencies. Many regulators have come to accept this situation as normal. Governments are in a noted cycle of reacting to emergencies rather than focusing on prevention and mitigation, and furthermore, DEM plans on reservations are outdated or lack essential information. To circumvent accountability, governments point to legislation that states responsibilities lies with First Nations, although we continue to witness that without proper adherence to treaty agreements and government policies, adequate services continue to fall short. Through further research, I intend to uncover what best practices for DEM with First Nations communities may look like, while also seeking to determine if incorporating various cultural practices into their strategies will help them to be empowered. Increasing community capacities can increase resiliency. The hope is that these catalysts propagate cultural survival. Collaborative tactics and research methods that respect Indigenous ways of understanding are important. Each theme identified in the literature review, namely the necessity of culture as identified in First Nations communities, social vulnerabilities, and industrial development and climate change are all intertwined and have compounding effects on not just each other but First Nations peoples. Proactive programs are essential that adhere to necessities such as fire halls and fire equipment being maintained and upgraded when necessary, ensuring households have working smoke detectors and public buildings are up to code, mitigation, prevention, and risk management training is available and utilized, and adequate emergency response funding and resources are made available. Seeking to understand how different stakeholders make meaning of similar terminology, i.e. disaster or emergency, is essential in order to determine how to create a language that is understood as the same by all parties. In summary, lack of ownership and responsibility of DEM with First Nations has presented resource constraints, compounding inequalities in Aboriginal communities that include social exclusion, racism, no food security, social political frictions, access to clean water and traditional lands, and access to health care and adequate DEM. Understanding how to better define DEM through both a Western lens and a First Nations perspective may lend to a more holistic approach to DEM. This is important to be cognizant of if to encourage different ways of seeing, ones that point to the limitations of preconceived epistemologies. Capacities are often rooted in resources which are endogenous to communities which rely on traditional knowledge, Indigenous skills and technologies, and solidarity networks. This will require further research in the field necessary in creating meaningful, trusting, and progressive relationships that are long overdue.